Ever feel like you took a wrong turn somewhere and ended up in a whole different reality? That's the vibe we're diving into today with the story of Silk Road, the billion-dollar drug marketplace operating on the dark web.
What's truly captivating about this case is how it transcends a simple crime story. It forces us to confront how technology, ideology, and the human desire for freedom can intersect in unpredictable and even unsettling ways.
We're lucky enough to have this incredibly detailed article, The Rise and Fall of Silk Road, as our guide. Published back in 2015, it's packed with first-hand accounts that provide this multi-dimensional look at how it all unfolded.
It's fascinating because we don't just get one side of the story. We hear from the Silk Road's mastermind, the law enforcement agents who took him down, and even those caught in the crosshairs.
Exactly. So think of this deep dive as going beyond the headlines to unpack the motivations and missteps of the key players. We'll also explore the technology that made it all possible, because without it, there is no Silk Road.
And by understanding those choices, you can start to grapple with some truly complex questions this case raises about crime, freedom, and the ethical dilemmas of a digital world.
Let's start with the man at the center of it all, Ross Ulbricht, the creator of Silk Road. Our source material describes something brilliant, but perhaps a little naive, a libertarian idealist who ends up creating something far bigger than he could control.
It's a story that demonstrates how ambition and unintended consequences often go hand in hand. Ulbricht's path to Silk Road wasn't a straight line, it was paved with failures. He tried day trading and crashed. He started a video game company that went up in flames. These setbacks seemed to fuel a desire in him, a need to not just exist in this world, but to actually build something new, something that mattered.
And he found that something in, of all things, online drug sales. You almost have to laugh, though his grand venture into this illicit world begins with him growing magic mushrooms in his apartment. Talk about humble beginnings.
It is a strange juxtaposition to imagine this physics graduate, disillusioned with the academic world, turning to psychedelic mushroom cultivation. But it underscores the allure of Bitcoin and libertarian ideals for Ulbricht. This combination, along with his scientific mind, led him to this unexpected path.
But this wasn't just some amateur mycologist stumbling in the dark. Ulbricht applied his meticulous nature to every aspect of Silk Road, painstakingly coding the entire website himself. He even takes on this alias, Dread Pirate Roberts, a nod to the Princess Bride, and a pretty savvy way to mask his identity.
That detail, the adoption of the Dread Pirate Roberts persona, is crucial. It highlights the inherent duality of Ulbricht's journey. Here he is, drawn to the anonymity and power of the dark web, yet you sense this internal struggle with the ethical ramifications of what he's building.
And as DPR, as he becomes known on Silk Road, he cultivates this almost cult-like following. He's not just running a marketplace, he's building a community. People hanging on his every word, seeing Silk Road as this blow against a system they believe is increasingly oppressive.
What's important to remember is that this is also the time when Bitcoin is gaining traction. Libertarian ideals were gaining a foothold in certain circles. You have this perfect storm of technology, ideology, and a charismatic leader. And Ulbricht, whether intentionally or not, ends up preaching a gospel of freedom through untraceable transactions.
But while Ulbricht is building his empire, in the shadows, there's this whole other side to the story gearing up. It's not just one agency. We're talking DEA, FBI, even Homeland Security gets in on the action.
It really becomes this clash of cultures when you think about it. On one side, you've got Ulbricht and his crew, these tech-savvy, I guess you could say idealists, who are convinced they found a way to operate outside the system, beyond the reach of traditional law enforcement.
And on the other side, you have agents like Carl Force from the DEA. This is a guy who's more accustomed to, kicking down doors and flipping informants. Suddenly, he's thrust into this world of Tor encryption and Bitcoin transactions, online aliases. Talk about a whole new ballgame, right?
It's almost comical, really. The source material describes these early days of the investigation, like they were bringing old school tactics to a digital gunfight.
Like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands, right?
Exactly.
But amidst all of this, you have Chris Tarbell at the FBI's cybercrime unit. He seems to be one of the few who truly gets it. He's not intimidated by the technology. If anything, it seems like he's fascinated by it. And he recognizes that to catch a ghost like DPR, you got to think like a ghost.
And Tarbell's story itself is almost as intriguing as Ulbricht's, this rookie agent straight out of Quantico. He had already made a name for himself infiltrating and dismantling LUTSEC, one of the most notorious hacker groups, using his knowledge of online culture.
Talk about making an entrance. But while Tarbell is busy cementing his legend in the cybercrime world, Carl Force takes a different approach. He creates this whole elaborate undercover persona, a high-rolling drug smuggler he calls Knob, to dive headfirst into Silk Road.
And this is where things get really interesting. Force's mission initially starts simple enough: gather intel, make connections, and if he's lucky, get close to DPR. But as he spends months and months cultivating this online identity, blurring the lines between cop and criminal, you start to see even he's beginning to question his own motives.
Imagine that for a second. You're a DVA agent, and you've created this online drug dealer persona, and it's all starting to blur together. What do you think happens to your own sense of self?
It's wild. The article captures the psychological toll this takes on both men. Ulbricht, becoming increasingly isolated, paranoid as Silk Road grows, he actually starts confiding in Force's online persona. He has no idea he's spilling his guts to the very guy who's trying to bring him down.
Oh, the irony. And as DPR, Ulbricht starts to take a dark turn. Remember Curtis Green, the Silk Road administrator?
Yeah.
He gets caught with a kilo of cocaine.
Oh, yeah, that's a pivotal moment in the story. Green, even though he's involved in the marketplace, he's almost portrayed sympathetically. You know, he's a guy struggling with chronic pain who just gets in over his head.
So when DPR finds out Green's been arrested, he panics. Convinced that Green will crack under pressure, Ulbricht decides to take drastic measures. This is where Ulbricht, the libertarian idealist who preached nonviolence and personal freedom, well, he takes his darkest turn.
Chilling, honestly. Right there in the article, through these encrypted messages with Force's undercover persona, DPR orders Green's execution. He even negotiates the price. It's the stark reminder that even in the seemingly abstract world of the dark web, actions have very real and very dark consequences.
And get this, that whole assassination plot, it was completely staged.
Yeah, a masterful, if not incredibly risky, piece of undercover work by Force and the task force.
High stakes, for sure. But it goes to show how much law enforcement had to adapt to fight this kind of crime on the dark web.
They couldn't just rely on the old ways, right? You can't exactly flip an informant and work your way up the ladder when you're dealing with a digital marketplace like this.
They had to get creative.
Exactly. It blurred the lines. Real life, the virtual world, all blending together, but it worked.
Meanwhile, Tarbell and his team in New York are still hard at work trying to crack Silk Road servers.
Which, let's be honest, seemed almost impossible at times.
Oh, I bet.
Tor encryption is no joke, like trying to pick a lock on a vault, but instead of metal, it's all code.
Yeah, and this one, it was designed to be impenetrable. For a long time, it really did seem like DPR had built an untraceable fortress online.
Almost. But everyone makes mistakes.
What do you mean?
They got lucky. Found a tiny crack in Silk Road's digital armor. Just a single misconfigured server exposed the site's actual IP address.
You're kidding. This whole operation, all that secrecy, brought down by a single mistake.
It happens more than you think. Even the most complex systems are vulnerable to human error. And in this case, that tiny oversight, that's all it took. The whole house of cards came tumbling down.
Talk about finding needle in a haystack. But they found it, and not long after, Ross Ulbricht is arrested, sitting in a San Francisco library, logged in as Dread Pirate Roberts.
Ironic, isn't it? A physics student turned dark web kingpin, brought down by the very technology he thought would set him free.
It's easy to get caught up in the intrigue of it all, but it's important to remember the real-world consequences of Silk Road.
Of course.
This wasn't some victimless crime. We're talking about a platform that made buying and selling highly addictive and sometimes deadly drugs incredibly easy.
Absolutely. Lives were ruined, and yes, some even lost because of the drugs that flowed through Silk Road.
It forces you to confront these uncomfortable questions about, where do we draw the line? What's the cost of freedom?
It really makes you think. Was Silk Road about personal empowerment, this fight against a system that Ulbricht and his followers saw as rigged? Or was it just a sophisticated criminal enterprise using the anonymity of the internet to spread addiction and, in some cases, even death?
The questions, no easy answers.
And they're more relevant now than ever. This case, this deep dive, it's not just about crime and punishment. It's about the power of ideas, the dark side of anonymity, and the ethical dilemmas we all face as the line between the real and virtual worlds gets blurrier every day.
It makes you wonder, when we have the ability to hide, not just online, but in every aspect of our lives, what does that do to us? Do we become more free or just more susceptible to our darker impulses?
Something to think about, for sure.
This has been a wild ride. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.